Enjoy the ride with Crystal Petrie Consulting. So inspiring. Pushing you to your dreams.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of 60 Minutes With. I'm your host, Crystal Petrie. Today, we're going to learn all about nonprofits. So if you have a nonprofit, if you're thinking about starting a nonprofit, if you know someone that is interested in starting a nonprofit, this is the podcast for you. And the person that's going to educate us all, including myself, about nonprofits, Kayla White. So welcome to the show, Miss White. How are you?
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. I'm doing well.
Good. Thank you so much for agreeing to sit down on the podcast and talk to us and educate us about nonprofits, because I feel like we hear about them all the time. It's kind of like they're here one day, gone the next. So this podcast, my hope and my intention is that we can help more nonprofits stay viable and stay sustainable in the process. Mm-hmm. Now, you are the executive director of the Southeast Texas Nonprofit Center located in Beaumont, Texas. So tell me a little bit about what exactly it is you do.
Well, at the center, we serve Hardin, Jefferson, Orange, and Chambers counties.
Okay.
And we were established actually about 15 years ago. We're celebrating our 15th year anniversary this year.
Happy anniversary.
And so we were established by a group of local funders in the community who saw a need for nonprofits to have access to resources and education that would allow them to be more sustainable and successful. And so that's a big part of what I do is facilitating services and programming that do just that.
Excellent. So can you tell me, as we were getting started, what is a nonprofit organization?
Essentially, a nonprofit is an organization that operates for no profit to serve the community in some capacity.
And what does someone have to do to become or to start a nonprofit organization?
Well, there's actually a lot that goes into it. It's not hard, but it is pretty lengthy. We actually host a workshop a couple times a year that helps nonprofits in the process of getting started. But you have to have a board of directors. I always recommend that organizations craft a business plan. You have to have bylaws and policies and procedures, along with all of the recommended and required filings that you have to do. So there's a lot that goes into it, but again, that's why organizations like us exist, to help nonprofits with that process.
The filing, does this center, the Southeast Texas Nonprofit Center, do you do the filing for the nonprofits, or do they have to go someplace like LegalZoom or something like that?
Most organizations do it themselves. Okay. We can guide them. But at the end of the day, they're going to have to maintain the program. And so filing all the paperwork and getting all those things done, that's just a part of program management. Right. And so, like I said, we act as a secondary service provider to help them along the way and to support them in their efforts. But as far as filing the paperwork for them, that's not something that we can do. But we can guide them, yes.
For nonprofits, and I know it's in the title, but I'm gonna ask the question anyway. Can nonprofits be a for-profit, or can they just only be a nonprofit?
No. So, in fact, one thing that we tell people whenever they're thinking about starting a nonprofit is to really think about if this organization would be better suited as a for-profit organization. Okay. Because if so, then you would not want to apply to be a nonprofit. So they are very different. Ideally, for-profit organizations are different because nonprofits, they don't distribute any funds to stakeholders, or they don't send them out as dividends or anything like that. All of the income that nonprofits receive are to go back into supporting the mission of the organization.
Okay. So is that the main difference between the for-profit and, okay, I never knew that.
Well, I mean, there's several other differences. Nonprofits get certain, they don't have to pay taxes, and they can, when people give them contributions, the donors can use that contribution as a tax write-off. And so there's a lot of other benefits, just like getting discounted rates for postage and things like that. Nonprofits have some other, leniencies that are afforded to them for being a nonprofit organization. There's often nonprofit rates and things like that because nonprofits do not make a profit.
Right.
And so therefore they're able to access those other benefits.
Okay. Why do you think someone would want to start a nonprofit?
Well, the best reason to start a nonprofit is because you identify a need in the community that exists, an unmet need that exists. And, most founders and people who start a nonprofit organization, it's because they've identified a need, someone that needs help or a community that needs help or is underserved, and they want to create change.
Okay.
So that's the best reason.
And of course, you just gave a great explanation about nonprofit and the funding coming back into the organization. If someone starts a nonprofit, how do they make money, like, for themselves to eat and live?
Well, I think there's a common misconception that nonprofits are not businesses and that they don't want to make money. But the reality is a nonprofit is a business. And that's one of the things that our center really tries to promote, is that you are a business and we want you to operate as a business, right? And again, there's also a common misconception that nonprofits don't want to make money. They can and do want to make money. But like I said, the money needs to go back into the programming. And of course, when you have leadership and staff, then you have to consider paying them reasonable rates and things like that, salaries. But, but one thing I do tell people is that if you're thinking about starting a nonprofit, don't expect this to be something that's going to make you extremely wealthy, right? Because that's not the idea. The idea is to put your efforts and your energy back into supporting your organization's mission.
And what are some ways that nonprofit organizations can get funding?
There's a lot of different ways. It depends on the organization. There are large organizations that have government affiliations, so they get government funding. Some get funding from funders like the United Way. And then a lot of organizations rely on community support. They rely on donors and volunteers and grants. Grants are a huge way that nonprofits get funding and campaigns and things like that to help support their programming.
Okay, so people can just donate money to the nonprofit, and I'm assuming that would be a tax write-off for them, right?
Right.
Okay. What are some ways that your center, the Southeast Texas Nonprofit Center here in Beaumont, Texas, assist with nonprofit organizations?
Well, we're like I said, we were established by a group of funders to help nonprofits access resources that could allow them to be more sustainable and successful. So we do that in a lot of different ways. We offer a lot of education, right? We connect them with resources that are relatable, that are top of mind right now, because a workshop that we hosted 5 years ago probably isn't relevant today, right? And so we partner with subject matter professionals to bring education to our Southeast Texas nonprofit sector that they are going to be able to use in real time. In addition to that, we're a lot about collaboration and connecting. So we connect them with resources. We have partnerships with our local, with Lamar University, to with KVOU out there, and with the Rio Honors College. So we work with them to facilitate programming that does benefit the nonprofit sector. We Again, we do monthly workshops and training. We partner with a lot of funders to distribute funding opportunities to nonprofits, especially like local funders. Usually they partner with us to get all of the information out to them. And so, in fact, some of them are even linked on our website. And we facilitate it that way. We also have a resource library where our nonprofit members can go and do research on potential grant opportunities. We actually, I believe the one we have is the only one in this area.
Wow.
And that's a great resource. We have a member directory, and so when someone is looking to support a nonprofit, maybe to volunteer, they can go and look at our member directory and toggle to different organizations and learn about their mission and see ways to contact them and see if they have any volunteer opportunities, things like that. So we do a lot of different, we offer notary services. So we have a lot of different services, and one thing that we do a lot now is we do a lot of custom training. So if a nonprofit member has a need, maybe they need some board development or some staff development, then we can work with them to customize a workshop or a session that would align with their needs.
Now, just want to go back a little bit. The KVLU, that's a radio station. So how does that benefit and help nonprofit organizations?
So KVLU has a weekly segment that they do. It's called NFP, and
what is NFP?
Not for profit.
Okay.
And NFP airs on air, but it also airs on a podcast as well. And each week there is a nonprofit guest that comes on. And, nonprofits have limited budgets and resources.
Right.
And so this is a resource that they can tap into to help share the word about what they're doing, talk about their upcoming events, if they need volunteers, so they can talk about what their needs are.
Right.
So it's just a good opportunity for them for advertising and marketing their programs.
And that's free for nonprofits, correct?
Yes, it's free for our members. Mm-hmm.
And you spoke about your member services and your the online resources. What is the website if someone wants to tap into that? What's the website that they need to go to?
SETXnonprofit.org.
Okay, perfect. How long must a nonprofit organization be established? Well, this is two questions. Number one, if someone who's watching or who's listening wants to become a member of the Southeast Texas Nonprofit Center, how do they do that? And my second question is, do they have to be an established nonprofit organization before they can become a member of the organization?
So to answer your first question, it's very easy to join.
Okay.
Visit our website at setxnonprofit.org, and we have an online application that you can fill out. It's very user friendly. And the short answer is no. You do not have to be an established nonprofit to join. We offer what's called an individual membership, because I understand that usually the organizations that need the most guidance are the ones that are new or trying to get established.
Yes.
And so they can do the individual membership and then access all of these resources that are going to help them to be successful. They might not have access to all of our services. Like if they haven't established yet, well, then they wouldn't have the member listing, but they would at least get to attend the workshops, network with all of these other
Yes.
organizations, because again, we encourage. In fact, we just had a conference that, and the theme for this year's conference was Together Towards Tomorrow. Mm-hmm. Right? Because it's important for nonprofits to all work together to create a greater impact. And so the opportunity for newer organizations to come together with existing long-running organizations and glean that information from them is a huge benefit. And so that's why we decided to start offering the individual membership, so they could at least tap into these resources.
Right. Is there a fee to join the nonprofit center?
There is a fee. All that information is on our website at setxnonprofit.org. But the fees are very minimal, and there's not a one the fees are based on your organization's budget.
Okay.
So we make sure that it's affordable for all organizations, no matter how big or small you are.
And one of the things I really love about this center, just kind of doing my research and speaking with you, is one of the main missions of this center is to make sure that nonprofits succeed.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I've discovered is that people start nonprofits all the time, but they are not sustainable. They don't stay a year or 2 years. They normally fail within 18 months. Why do you think that is?
Oh gosh, there's a lot of reasons. One thing I will say is that a lot of nonprofits, as a result of the pandemic, they were forced to close. But I'm seeing in the last year and a half that I've been with the center, that we're seeing a resurgence of nonprofits that are starting to reform to address unmet needs that now exist in the community. But to answer your question, I feel like the majority of the time nonprofits fail because they don't have access to funding. That's the main reason. You know, when we have workshops and trainings, the ones that are have the highest attendance are the ones about grant writing and funding opportunities. So that is and probably always will be the number one problem that nonprofits have, is just maintaining funding so that they can be sustainable. We are in a community, and unfortunately a smaller community, and unfortunately nonprofits are all competing for the same dollars.
Yes.
And that creates a challenge, right? But you know, funding isn't the only reason. You know, again, as I mentioned earlier, as I alluded to, nonprofits are businesses. And so nonprofits have to operate as a business, and sometimes that's a challenge, especially when you have nonprofits that are run by volunteers. So there's a lot of different reasons, but I would say funding is probably the number one reason.
And we do have some nonprofits that have sustained and been here for years and years and years. What do you think those nonprofits have done to maintain their organization?
They've been consistent. They have proven that they're a good steward of charitable funds. They continue to grow. They continue to create programming and services that address needs that exist or needs that arise. They're innovative.
Okay. And what do you think are some must-haves? It could be the smallest to the largest. What do you think are some must-haves that every nonprofit organization needs?
Well, other than money, they need a board of directors. They need bylaws.
Okay.
Mostly that's the typical things you have to have in order to have a nonprofit organization.
And we'll get into like exactly what are board of directors and what are bylaws a little bit later into the interview. But you mentioned that funding and grant funding is so necessary for sustainability for nonprofit organizations. Do you know of some websites or a website that a nonprofit organization or a nonprofit entity can go to look for funding?
The resource that we have, the resource library that I mentioned earlier, it is a wonderful resource. It's called the Foundation Directory Online. It's powered through Candid, and it is a resource that our members can tap into for conducting grant research. And of course, there's other websites like GrantSpace and grants.gov and whatnot, but those are all fee-based, right?
Okay.
You're going to have to pay a fee to tap into those resources, and most organizations can't afford those fees.
Right.
Especially if they're startups,
Now, I know some of the classes and the trainings that has been done here at the Southeast Texas Nonprofit Center has been about the use of social media. So let's talk about that a little bit. Do you feel like social media has been a hindrance to nonprofit organizations or a help?
I think it's twofold, right?
Okay.
I think it's more of a help than a hindrance. The hindrance comes with social media management.
Okay.
And creating a voice for your organization, right? You have, and also time, right? Because social media is very time consuming, and most nonprofits have limited resources, and so therefore they have limited time to dedicate towards having an appropriate social media strategy. And so that's one way that it's harmful. But it's more helpful than it is harmful, because nonprofits now have an opportunity because of social media that they didn't have before social media existed, right? Because they can post something on social media, no matter what the platform is, and they can reach someone across the country, across the world, and they can tap into resources that they would never be able to tap into otherwise. Right. So for me, and it's cost effective, right? Social media doesn't have to cost you a dime.
It's true.
And so for me, I feel like if you are a nonprofit and you're not utilizing social media, then you're doing your organization a disservice.
If you could recommend one social media platform for every nonprofit organization to use, which one would that be and why?
I get that question a lot, actually. And the answer is I recommend two.
Okay.
Because Facebook and Instagram are now owned by the same, they have the same owner. Right? And so there is a resource that allows you to manage both Facebook and Instagram simultaneously.
Okay.
And so if you're going to have one, most people utilize Facebook. But if you're going to utilize Facebook, you might as well use Instagram, because Meta Business Suite makes it so much easier to manage both of them. So that's my recommendation as a starting place. But organizations really have to understand and pay attention to where social media is going, and video where when we saw Instagram, when Instagram began, we saw that, okay, we have to now publish graphics and other content where we can't just put text out there. Well, and so Instagram was an image-based platform, right? Well, now we're actually seeing that these platforms are going towards video, and video content is what's creating what's generating more visibility. And so now they're tasked with the responsibility of now having to put together videos and the production of it all, and just taking a picture sometimes whenever something's going on is a challenge, or creating content is a challenge, especially for organizations that have privacy concerns for their clientele. Coming up with content can be very difficult. And so as a result, creating videos is a challenge, but I'm seeing that that's the direction it is going in. But like I said, if you haven't tapped into social media yet, at least start with Facebook and Instagram to get your message out there.
And from my understanding, because you're right, they're both owned by the same entity now, Facebook and Instagram, you can post to like Facebook and then it'll automatically post to Instagram, correct? Or post to Instagram and it'll automatically post to, like, the same thing will automatically post to Facebook, correct?
You can, but also you can access that the business suite, and you can also alter. You can schedule the same posts, and it gives you the opportunity, since Instagram has limitations that Facebook doesn't have. You can actually alter the post in the same with the same movement, essentially. You can alter it and then schedule it, and it'll post, and you can change, like let's say you have a longer message or a longer caption that you want to post on Facebook, but because Instagram only displays a shorter, you might want to shorten it for that other platform. And this Meta Business Suite gives you the opportunity to do that all at once.
Oh wow, that's so good.
Yeah, it's helpful. Like I said, and there's other, you can manage multiple platforms through like Constant Contact and Canva. There's a lot of different ways, but again, you know, it can be very overwhelming whenever you start thinking about all of these different platforms that you have to tap into. So that's where I recommend organizations to begin.
Okay. Most nonprofit organizations work with a skeleton crew, meaning one or two people is doing everything, the social media, the program management, the budgeting, all of that. What advice can you give for nonprofits that are working with one or two, maybe three people to help them prevent burnout?
To keep yourself in mind. If you don't take care of yourself, then you're not going to be a help to anyone else. And a lot of these organizations have people that are really relying on them, some for life-saving and life-sustaining services, right? And so we have to think of ourselves and make sure that we're taking time for ourselves, not just our physical health, but our mental health and our emotional health as well, because the nonprofit sector is very taxing. Nonprofit leaders, in some cases, not all cases, but in some cases, they deal with very heavy topics, people that really that touch us and affect us mentally, situations and circumstances. Even if you're an organization that is focused on the environment and animals and whatever, you know, we do this because we have a heart for it, right? And so because we care so deeply about it, it does create a challenge to manage it all, because when you're really passionate about something, you give it everything. And you have to also give yourself something in return and give yourself grace.
Right. And I think with that, you know, something as easy, maybe not as easy because you can't turn off your mind, but maybe just taking a day off, you know, and closing down shop and saying, I'm not going to work on this nonprofit organization. I'm not going to work on this budget. So something maybe, you know, as simple as that, just taking the day off, cutting off the phone, if that's possible for anybody these days, turn off your cell phone. But yes, why do you think communities need nonprofits?
Gosh. Well, I would hate to see where our community would be without nonprofits, right? Think about organizations. I mean, think about people that wouldn't have access to food or to shelter or to vital services that they need if organizations didn't exist. Like, think about if the food bank didn't exist. People wouldn't have access to food. Think about if the Rape and Suicide Crisis Center didn't exist, and so people that needed help didn't have access to those resources, or Meals on Wheels organizations. You know, people would be in their homes without access to food and someone to check on them each day. Think about if Mothers Against Drunk Driving didn't exist. We wouldn't have advocacy out there to help you know, with people who have experienced loss as a result of drunk driving. So there's all that. I mean, I think that nonprofits are really what makes our community so vital, right? And helps with community growth. We support these organizations. It's so important to show them support, you know, and to just help them with their basic needs, because they are really doing a whole lot to make sure that people in the community, that resources exist to again, address an unmet need.
Right. So let's talk about if someone is wanting to start a nonprofit or they started a nonprofit. It's a lot of lingo that goes along with that. It's a lot of acronyms that goes along with that. So I'm going to ask you some questions for you to explain to myself and to my audience exactly what the words mean, what the acronyms mean, and what they are used for within the nonprofit sector. So the first one is, what is an EIN, which is an acronym? What does that mean and what is it for?
An EIN is an employee identification number, and so this would only be if you plan on having employees.
Okay. Now, with that, is it sort of like having a social security number or a tax ID number, or is that something completely different?
So a tax ID number is separate from an EIN.
Okay.
A tax ID number is something that all nonprofits will receive whenever they file for their tax exemption. And your tax ID number is basically what you utilize whenever you make purchases. And a lot of donors will require, you will usually put your tax ID number at the bottom of a receipt or a contribution letter acknowledging a donor's gift, because that tax ID number is what's verifying that you are a tax exempt organization. So you'll have to tap it, you'll have to access your tax ID number whenever you go and make a purchase somewhere so that you don't have to pay taxes. So that's the difference between a tax ID number and an EIN number.
Okay. And what is a board of directors?
Your board of directors typically is your governing body of the organization. They are, again, typically all organizations do run differently. Not all organizations have paid staff. And then some organizations do have, they're strictly run by volunteers. But your board of directors are volunteers. And again, they're the governing body. They're mostly responsible for writing policies, for having, being over the overall governance of the organization.
And how many? Is there like a certain number that you need to have on a board of directors, or you can't go over this number?
So you have to have 3 in the state of Texas.
Okay.
And 2 have to be a president and a secretary. But another common is a treasurer, vice president. And those are typically like board officers or your executive board. And then you have just general board members that help support the organization. Again, you have to have 3. I typically don't recommend having more than 20.
Okay.
But
That seems like a lot.
Yeah, it is a lot. But I also do recommend it if you have a board of directors to try and have an odd number of members. That way you don't have to ever worry about when they make a vote. You don't have to worry about there being a split, so you have a tiebreaker basically.
Right. Can the person who started the nonprofit organization, the CEO, if you will, be a part of the board of directors?
They can.
Okay.
But board members, in most cases, and in terms of when I coach people, your board are volunteers, and so they're unpaid. And so a founder of an organization can be a board member, or they can be the CEO. But one thing or the executive director. But one thing that happens whenever, and I see a lot, whenever founders transition into that executive director role, the board is responsible for that person. And so that becomes a challenge for founders, because the board is one of their main roles is to oversee the executive director, to hire them, to evaluate them. And so that becomes a challenge for nonprofit founders that put themselves in that position.
So, if I'm understanding this correctly, the board of directors could fire.
Mm-hmm.
What? Mm-hmm. I don't know why anyone would put themselves in that situation. What? I would never.
Well, that's why it's important to have a board of directors that you have faith and trust in,
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that is one of the responsibilities of the board.
Wow. Okay. Does every nonprofit have to have a board of directors?
Yes.
Okay. What are bylaws?
Bylaws basically are the document that you have that describes how you're going to conduct business, essentially. Some things that would be included in your bylaws would be information about your board. If you have committees, what are the committee responsibilities? How often do you meet? But they are your kind of like your rules and regulations,
Okay.
for your and bylaws are going to be specific to every different organization. So not one organization is going to have the same set of bylaws as any other organization. So they're going to be different for all nonprofits. But essentially it defines how you're going to conduct business and how your board is going to conduct business.
And does every nonprofit have to have bylaws as well?
Yes.
You do. Okay, so you spoke about the federal tax exempt status earlier, where the nonprofits do not have to pay taxes. And I'm assuming that's on anything they purchase. They don't have to pay taxes, correct? How do you apply for that status?
It's a bit of a process.
Okay.
We go over that process whenever we do our starting a nonprofit workshop. But there's paperwork that has to be filed with the IRS and Secretary of State as well. And there is a small fee associated with it, but it's not an overwhelming fee.
Okay. What are articles of incorporation?
Your articles of incorporation are basically your articles talk about how you were founded and the purpose of your organization, the mission of your organization. They are your formation documents, basically.
Okay. What organization, if you can, which nonprofit organization do you think would be easiest to start? Would it be one that maybe is serving food, or one that is helping to pay a light bill, or is there an easy nonprofit to start?
I mean, I think the process is about the same for anyone. I don't think it's so much about starting the nonprofit, but as we talked about earlier, sustaining it. Obviously, organizations that are helping that are benefiting children or the underserved,
Right.
Or feeding people. Those are all organizations that are usually they usually have the most support. But the process is the same for all organizations. It's more so about sustainability and providing a service that the community really believes in and gets behind.
And the organization that you're executive director of, Southeast Texas Nonprofit Center, is a nonprofit organization, correct?
We are.
How long have you worked within the nonprofit sector?
Oh, let's see. I started working for a nonprofit in 2009, so almost 15 years.
Okay. And why did you choose to start working in the nonprofit sector?
Well, I ended up in the nonprofit sector on accident,
Okay.
honestly. I took I have a business degree, and so I took a job that in a nonprofit that was going to allow me to utilize that degree. And I kind of fell in love with it because I learned really quickly that when you work for a nonprofit, you wear many hats. But I liked that because I wasn't just the CFO. I was also able to tap into my interest in digital marketing and graphic design, and so I got to do, and then that led me into learning more about development, and I really fell in love with the development process of nonprofits and managing funds and writing grants, and so it was a creative outlet, and so that led me into a development position at another organization where I was able to create fundraisers and create programming and still continue to write grants, and I loved it. I loved it so much, and I really liked the idea that I was able to use my business degree that I worked really hard to get to
and pay for.
that I was able to use my business degree on some level to have an impact in the community. Even though I might not have been in all cases working directly with the people that we serve at whatever organization I was at, I knew that grant that I wrote and received was going to have an impact in their lives in some way. And in the fundraisers that were successful and things like that, everything that I did in some way was making a valuable contribution to helping this organization be successful. And so that's one of the reasons why I've remained in the nonprofit sector for so many years.
And I know that people's intention, like when they're in like sectors in their career, it changes over the years. But for you right now, today, what is your personal intention working in nonprofit?
Well, one of the reasons why I was intrigued by the Nonprofit Development Center was because it gives me the capacity to help a wide variety of nonprofits.
Okay.
Right? And I'm not an expert. I know some people think that I am. I don't know everything, but the reality is that if there's something that I don't know, I have access to someone that does, right? And so that's a lot about what I do. But I just like being able to serve on committees and conduct workshops and trainings and see nonprofits that I've helped to thrive. I love when I get to see an organization, especially a newer organization, apply for new grant funding that was as a result of the resource we provided, and see them at that grant award ceremony getting that money that they would not have had otherwise, and then seeing them put that money into their programs and develop new programs and develop new services to help more individuals. And so again, this position allows me to help in a larger capacity, and that I really do enjoy that.
Oh, that sounds so good. And it feels like it's really rewarding, because you can really see the work from A, B, C through the end. So that's so good.
Yeah, it is rewarding, and I enjoy it. That's not to say it's not a lot of work.
Right.
But I really and our nonprofit. We mentioned earlier how the nonprofit sector is growing, but I've even seen in the last year and a half of being with the center that our membership has grown.
Really?
It has grown. So we've been in existence for about 15 years. And over the course of that 15 years, we accumulated about 120 members. And that's over a 15-year time period. Well, in the last year and a half, we've gone from 120 members to now 160 in a year and a half. So what it took us to get over the course of 15 years, we have a large percentage of that we've now, had join in just a year and a half. So, that tells me obviously that our nonprofit sector is growing, but it also tells me that our resources are valuable. And they see value in the education and opportunities that we provide. And so that's rewarding to me as well, seeing that they want to tap into this resource.
What do you think has caused the boom?
Again, I think it's that they're seeing we have a lot. We're much more visible now.
Okay.
We just hosted a conference, which a nonprofit that's specific to nonprofit organizations, and it's something that we're going to host every other year moving forward. And we've incorporated a lot of workshops and education and programming that is needed right now, right?
Yes.
That they can access right now. We are partnering with more funders, and we're just, again, more visible. And I think that has been a big reason why so many organizations want to access the resource, because it is affordable, right?
Yeah.
It's affordable for them to join, so why not?
Yes.
And some people join just because they want to be a part of the network, right? Of organizations that can come together to create a greater impact. And so I think that's a big reason as well.
What do you think, if someone is watching this, if someone is listening to this, thinking about starting a nonprofit, what do you think they should be doing before they actually file the paperwork and get the tax ID number and the bylaws and the board of directors? What are some things that they should be doing before all of that? Should they take a class, read a book? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, they should take a class. There's always books and research. I mean, you could do research online. The number one thing I always advise people to do is to put together a business plan.
Okay.
I can't stress enough how important it is for anyone starting a nonprofit to understand that you should look at this as a business, and it should be, you should operate it as a business. And so that's why I recommend, first and foremost, putting together a business plan, putting together your core messaging, and your business plan will describe not only your programs and services, but how you're going to facilitate these programs and services. You need to have a plan for how you're going to make all of this work. Who's going to manage the day-to-day programming? The worst thing you can do is get your 501c3 or whatever you get, and go somewhere and start promoting your services, and then you don't have the ability to facilitate them. That's the worst thing you can do.
Yes.
So you don't want, and you don't want to make promises to the community or to funders that you can't keep. Nonprofits do struggle with that sometimes, and so you definitely want to have all your ducks in a row, so to speak, before you actually, the paperwork and everything is really not the difficult part. It's making sure you have everything in line before you get to that process.
And does this center help with business plans? So, okay, somebody needs to write their business plan as you stated, but they have no idea how to even do that. Where could they go to get help doing that?
Yeah, we do offer consulting services. Again, it's really based on need, and every now and then, pretty often actually, people will call and they'll say what their idea is, and we can consult with them to help offer some advice and give them some direction. But yeah, and when we do our starting a nonprofit workshops, we always make sure that they leave with something tangible that they can take with them, a sample business plan, a sample bylaws, things like that that can help them form these documents so that they just don't have to start from scratch.
Right. So the trainings and the classes that you guys give, this is two questions. One, do you have to be a member of the nonprofit center to go to those classes, or can anybody just go?
So yes and no.
Okay.
We do have workshops that are public and they're free to the public. We in 2024 we're going to host 6, and all of these workshops are going to be at the R.C. Miller Library in Beaumont. They're all going to be on topics relating to nonprofit basics.
Okay.
Starting a nonprofit, the basics of grant writing, the basics of planned giving, the basics of storytelling, all things that are essential for nonprofits to know as they enter the sector, right? So those workshops are, again, free to the public. The other workshops that we offer monthly here at our center will be, again, subjects that are relevant right now for nonprofits. They're hosted by subject matter professionals that have experience and knowledge in that field, and those are fee-based. They are free to our members, but if you're not a member of our organization, then there's a small fee associated.
And how do people find out about those classes and sign up for those classes?
All of our classes are on our website. When you go to our website, sctxnonprofit.org, there is a calendar at the top that, well, when we update it for the year, all of our workshops will be there. And we also have a lot of online partners that we work with that offer free webinars to anyone, regardless of membership. We work with an organization called Instrumental. We work with an organization called the Nonprofit Learning Lab, and their resources are really helpful too to people that are thinking about, entering the nonprofit sector.
Can someone start a nonprofit with no money?
No. The short answer is no. I mean, you do need some money.
Yeah.
Because you're going to have money to file paperwork and things like that. But, you need some money. And honestly, it depends on the services, right? But ideally you want nonprofit. I think it's a common misconception that nonprofits don't want to make money. They do. They do want to make money. Like I said earlier, the only difference is that the money and the income that nonprofits receive are to go back into the programming to fulfill the organization's mission, right? So nonprofits do want to make money, so that they can expand their services. And ideally, and I've worked with nonprofits that are volunteer run. I mean, their goal is to get enough funding so that they can hire someone to do these, to manage these programs.
Yes.
You know, and that is becoming increasingly more difficult because, you know, no one wants to work for free, you know, and
Sure.
it is a lot of work, and you do want to pay people a reasonable wage, right? And so, but yeah, so they can make money, and they want to.
Is there an alternative to nonprofits? We spoke about, of course, spoke about nonprofits at length during this interview and spoke a little bit about for-profit. But is there something in the middle of that, or are those just the only two options?
No, there's a lot of other options. Some organizations have what's called like a fiscal sponsor, where they conduct a service, but they're not necessarily a nonprofit organization. They kind of work under the umbrella of an established nonprofit.
Okay.
So that's an option. There are other options, and there are other filings, I guess you could say, like your local chambers. That's a different type of organization. Organizations like Rotary, those are different types of 501 organizations. So there's a lot of different ones, but we focus on organizations that are community-based and 501. And again, the bulk of our nonprofits anywhere are 501c3 nonprofit organizations.
Okay. How does someone know if they are ready to start a nonprofit?
Again, I think the business plan, having that together, understanding that they need support. I don't advise people to try doing it by themselves. You obviously have to have a board of directors, but having people on board to support you is really important. Whether that's volunteers or funders, and identifying who your key stakeholders are really important. I think there's a common misconception about who your stakeholders are. People think your stakeholders are just your donors. But the reality is your stakeholders are your donors, your board members, your staff, your volunteers, and the people that you serve. Because without them, you would not exist.
I thought it was just the donors.
Yeah, so you need all of those people to be successful.
Okay. If someone starts a nonprofit, does that mean that they own that nonprofit organization?
No, no one owns a nonprofit. It's a community organization. So no one person ever would own a nonprofit organization.
Who do you think should not start a nonprofit?
I mean, well, like I kind of alluded to earlier, if you think you're going to get rich, if that's the goal, no. Don't start a nonprofit. Listen, the best reason to start a nonprofit is because you have the heart to help in some capacity.
Okay.
And so if that's not where you're at, it's probably not a good idea. If you don't have the best of intentions, like I said, nonprofits get themselves in trouble for not being a good steward of charitable funds. So if you aren't prepared to do that and be honest and upfront, and because like I said, as a nonprofits are held to a much higher standard than for-profit organizations.
Why is that?
Because you are being given money and people are investing in you, and they're not, in most cases, receiving a service in return, right? So because of that, nonprofits are held to a much higher standard. They are because they are so reliant on public trust, right? And so that's why anytime I speak about to classes or to individuals, I always say be a good steward of charitable funds, because that will tarnish your reputation instantly. That's a surefire way. You asked me earlier about what's one reason that they fail. That's a surefire way to fail, is to have your community get wind of the fact that you weren't a good steward of the funding.
So as we get ready to end this interview, I would like for you, and I feel like you're educated, your expert opinion, what is the one thing that you want to strongly convey to people who are thinking about starting a nonprofit or have already started a nonprofit? If it's one thing you could let them know, what would that be?
Consistency. And again, being a good steward of charitable funds, I feel like, that's so important, because it is how your organization is going to navigate throughout the whole entire time you exist, right? Filing the paperwork and handling the taxes and doing those mundane, like taking care of administration and all of that it's gonna come. You have to take care of that regardless. And it is work. But, again, like I said, because we are so reliant on public trust, it's so vital to make sure that you are doing what you need to do to maintain that public trust, right? And that's my biggest advice, is to uphold the mission of the organization, to give the organization a good reputation, and to hold yourself accountable and responsible for the investment that the community has made into your organization.
Okay. And my final question for you: who do you think would make a great guest on the podcast, but you have to help me get them on?
Just one person?
Oh, if you have more than one, please.
I'm in the nonprofit sector, but someone that I immediately think of that doesn't have a nonprofit but does so much for nonprofits and also runs her own business is Tito.
Okay.
She is an insurance agent, but she is a community champion for nonprofits, and I see her everywhere doing things to help. She just helped with our conference, and she helps facilitate events for a lot of organizations in the community, all while helping people address their insurance needs. So I think she would be a great person to interview for sure.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming to the podcast and answering the questions, educating me, because there was so much I didn't know about nonprofits, and the stuff that I knew, some of the stuff that I knew was completely wrong.
Yeah.
Like the stakeholders, I thought that was just the donors. So thank you so
welcome.
much. And I really feel like the information that you have freely given is going to help so many nonprofits, so many organizations and individuals, getting into it, but also navigating some of the pitfalls that come along with having a nonprofit organization. So I appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And thank you so much for tuning in and watching. You can get this podcast and all of my other podcasts on YouTube Podcasts and Apple Podcasts. And remember, you always have time to listen and learn on the go.